Selamünaleyküm. Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Salatu vesselamu ala Resulina Muhammedin seyyidil evvelin ve ahirin. Meded ya Resul, meded ya Sadat, ashabu sünnet. Meded ya Şahid Resul, ve inşallah fazla Hasan Şeyh Muhammed al-Hakkani ve Hüdü. Tarikatuna as-suhba ve hayru fil cemiyye. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Şehr Ramadan ellezî unzile fîhil Kur'an huden linnâsi ve beyinâtin minel huda vel furqân. Sadakallâhul azîm. Bu mübarek Ramazan ayı Allah'ın sevdiği aydır.
The holy month of Ramadan is a month that Allah Almighty loves.
Tabii onun fazileti, yapılan ibadet Allah indinde hesapsız verilir.
The virtue of the sacred month of Ramadan is that the worship performed within this month is rewarded endlessly in the presence of Allah Almighty.
Hesapsız verilir. Onun için ne kadar hayır yapmaya, ibadetinizi yapabilirseniz yapsın insan. Yapamazsa bile niyetle ben niyet ettim. Bu bütün Ramazan'ı Allah Azze ve Celle'nin istediği gibi olsun.
In this holy month of Ramadan, Allah Almighty gives endlessly. So however much good you can do, however much worship you can perform, you should do it. Even if one cannot, one should at least have the intention and say, I intend for the whole month of Ramadan to be as Allah Almighty wants me to be.
Bizim taksir yaptığımız çoktur.
We have many shortcomings.
Yapabildiğimiz kadar yapalım. Allah niyetimize göre versin.
Nevertheless, we should do as much as we can, and we must ask Allah Almighty to give us according to our intentions.
Odur mühim olan. Bazı insanlar fazla yapar, bazı az yapar.
What is important is to gain Allah Almighty's pleasure and make Allah Almighty to be pleased with us. Some people may do more, some people may do less.
Mühim olan Allah Azze ve Celle'nin rızasını kazanmak.
But what it all comes down to is to obtain Allah Almighty's pleasure and satisfaction.
Her şeyde Allah rızasını kazanmaya niyet edersen o niyetle amelin az olsa bile Allah'ın indinde tam verilir.
If you intend to gain the pleasure of Allah Almighty in everything you do, then with that intention, even if your deeds are a few, they are fully rewarded in the presence of Allah Almighty.
Allah Azze ve Celle ekremin cömertlerin en cömerti.
Allah Almighty is the most generous of the generous.
Ufak tefek şeylere bakmaz.
He doesn't look at trivial things.
Ama işte bazen şeylere de dikkat etmek lazım.
But sometimes one must also pay attention to the details. One must pay attention to those things one considers trivial.
Oruç tutarken ne zaman tutacak, ne zaman bırakacak diye onu yapar. Bazı insanların kafalarını karıştırıyorlar.
So, while Allah Almighty is generous, it is our duty to also pay attention to the details. So, when fasting, one should pay attention to when to start fasting and when to stop fasting. There are people who confuse people's minds about when to start and when to stop.
Hatta bizim duyduğumuz güneş çıkana kadar yenir derler.
In fact, there are groups saying that you can eat until the sun rises.
Diyen şeyler var. Bilmem imsak vakti şuydu buydu diye.
They confuse people's minds by arguing about the time of imsak.
Onun için ona biraz dikkat etmek lazım.
But the time of imsak, the time when to start fasting, when to stop eating, is a matter one should pay attention to.
İmsaktan sonra bir şey yenmez.
After imsak, you cannot eat something if you fast.
Hani güneş çıkana kadar da diyorlar. Bazı alim de çıkıp konuşur.
There are people who indeed claim that you can eat until the sun rises, and those who make such claims even show themselves as scholars.
Onlar alim değil, onlar cahildir.
They are not scholars, they are ignorant.
Sen koca Ramazan'ı 5 dakika 10 dakika için bozmaya gerek yok.
Don't ruin the great Ramadan for yourself for just eating for 5 or 10 minutes extra.
Allah Azze ve Celle'nin buyurduğu odur. Allah'ın gösterdiği şey uyulması lazım olan şeydir.
Allah Almighty has made clear when to fast and has made the timings clear, and it is the command of Allah Almighty that we need to observe and obey.
Tabii işte bu mühim olan bu. Öteki yapılacak şeyler niyetle olur da bu şeye dikkat etmek lazım. Sahur vaktine imsak hani dedi imsak dedi normalde ezana kadar ezandan sonra
So we must pay attention to the rulings and the requirements of the worship we want to perform, and then it is based on our intentions. So the thing we must pay attention to is, for example, when fasting, we must know when to start and when to stop, and we must pay attention to the time of sahur, imsak, and the time of sahur, imsak is until the time when it's time to call the adhan, when it's time to call the prayer.
şey yapmaz. O temkin için de olabilir. 5-10 dakika, 15 dakika önceden ezandan önce durmak daha iyi olur.
So when it's imsak, you may no longer eat. And when it's imsak, it's also the time when the adhan is recited for morning prayer. So after that call to morning prayer, you cannot eat. And as a precaution, it would even be better and safer to stop 5 or 15 minutes before the call to prayer.
Kendin şey olursun. Yok yapmadın. Madem tayin etmişler. Muvakit vardı eskiden.
So you must absolutely follow the timings and the rules when imsak has been defined.
Vakit dedi, vakti ayarlayan, hesap eden, ne zaman sahur olur, ne zaman imsak olur, imsak dediği şeydir.
And there used to be in the past timekeepers for this matter, and the timekeeper would be someone who would adjust and calculate the time for when imsak is, for when to make sahur, and they calculated when to make sahur and when imsak is.
En son yemek ondan sonra olmaz diye.
And imsak is the time after which eating is no longer allowed.
Ezan vakitlerini, sabahı, öğleni, ikindi hepsini vakitler vardı.
And there would be timekeepers who would calculate and ensure when the right time for the prayer is.
Şimdi yok ama şey var, artık takvimler var, ona göre ayarlanmış.
Now there are no longer such timekeepers who define the times for prayer, but now there are calendars, and those calendars have been adjusted accordingly.
Eskiden o olmadığı için, o olsa zaten vakit olsa genelde daha güzel olacak ama o yoktur diye ne yapalım, şeye tabi oluruz.
Since there were no calendars in the past, timekeepers were necessary. If there were still timekeepers, that would generally be better. But since there are no longer those timekeepers, we follow the calendars, inshallah.
Ama dediğim gibi şey yapmak isteyen varsa temkin olarak 5 dakika 10 dakika önceden şey yapsın, niyet etsin, oruç tutmaya.
But again, if one wants to be cautious, one should stop eating 5 or 10 minutes before the time and make the intention to fast.
Ondan sonrasını yemesin.
And after that, one should not eat.
Allah rızası için 5 dakika yemezse bir şey olmaz.
So if one doesn't eat for 5 minutes for the sake of Allah Almighty, nothing will happen.
Onun için buna dikkat etmek lazım.
So this is a matter one must pay attention to.
Kalanı da dediğimiz gibi vaktine riayet ettikten sonra hepsi makbul ibadetlerdir.
So there are certain types of worship which are defined by their times when to perform them.
Allah'ın rızasına nail olursun.
And when you perform these worships according to their times, you will attain Allah Almighty's pleasure.
Asıl Allah her şeye vakit zaman vermiş.
Allah Almighty has given everything a specific time.
Ramazan'ın vakti var.
There is a time for Ramadan.
Bayramın vakti var.
There is a time for Eid.
Sabahın, öğlenin vakti. Bazı şeyler var ki sabah olmadan sabahın vakti oynanmaz.
And there's a time for morning prayer. There's a time for noon prayer. And you may not change those times. And for example, for morning prayer, you cannot pray morning prayer before its time.
Öğlen gene aynı şekilde. Yani biraz önce kılsak. İkindi öyle değil. İkindin asr-ı evvel var, asr-ı thani var.
And the same is of course for noon prayer, for Salatul Dhuhr. You cannot perform noon prayer before its time. When it comes to Asr prayer, afternoon prayer, there are two time spans. There's Asr Awal, Asr Thani. There's a designated time to perform Asr earlier. There's a designated time to perform it later.
Biraz erken, biraz sonra olabiliyor. Akşam gene vakti sabittir. Onun daha önce kılamazsın.
And the evening Maghrib prayer is also a time which is fixed. You cannot pray it earlier.
Yatsının var, onun da vakti geniştir. Onun olabilir yani biraz erken biraz sonra.
And the time for the night prayer, Salat al-Isha, is also wide. So you may pray it at the beginning or you may pray it later.
Değişebiliyor ama öteki vakitler riayet etmek lazım.
And these are times that must be strictly observed.
Onları gözetmek lazım. Bu en mühim de bu iftarla sahurun son saatlerine dikkat etmek lazım.
And most importantly, when fasting, one must pay attention to when to make iftar and to when to make sahur.
Allah kabul etsin.
May Allah Almighty accept our worship.
Allah ibadetimizi kabul etsin.
May Allah Almighty make our worship acceptable.
Bu bilmeden tabi olan insan varsa tövbe istiğfar etsin, Allah affetsin inşallah.
And if there are people who have followed wrong practices without knowing, they should repent and seek forgiveness, and may Allah Almighty forgive us all.
Allah tevfik. El Fatiha.